We have a movie that has the word apocalypse in its title. I feel like this movie is missing something.
Today we are canceling the apocalypse!
That's what's missing.
They built will fall, and from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one.
X-Men Apocalypse is the ninth film in the X-Men franchise, starring James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Nicholas Hoult, Jennifer Lawrence, Oscar Isaac, and a slew of other actors and actresses that I can't think off the top of my head. It's also the fourth X-Men movie directed by Bryan Singer. Alright, this movie takes place 10 years after Days of Future Past. We see that Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters is now up and running with a full-fledged campus similar to what we see in the original X-Men. Magneto is living a quiet life with a wife and a daughter in the middle of Poland. And now Apocalypse has awoken. Apocalypse is the first mutant ever and all-powerful, and he thinks that humanity has lost its way and he wants to cleanse the earth. So what do I like about this movie? I think the cast, again, is superb. A lot of people talk about, oh, Jennifer Lawrence is phoning it in. I don't see that. I think she's serviceable at minimum. I can see why some people would say that, but it didn't bother me at all. Magneto is the heart and soul of this movie, in my opinion, because he has the most tragic character arc in this movie. And you understand why he goes back to being Magneto. Even though you don't condone it, you understand it. There's this scene that pretty much sums up why he goes back to being Magneto, and it's just so sad, so tragic, so gut-wrenching, but you understand why he does it. I really liked Oscar Isaac's performance as Apocalypse. His character, on the other hand, is so original. It's not like we haven't seen, a villain that wants to destroy the world. But what Oscar Isaac does with the character, he delivers the lines really well. He's really menacing. And you do understand why he wants to destroy the world despite the less than two-dimensional character he is given. I like the introduction of Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Nightcrawler, and to get to see their origins. Obviously, we've seen these characters in the first X-Men and the second X-Men, but we never get to see their origins and how they deal with their newfound powers, and to see them at their vulnerable state, and how basically Charles Xavier helps them to cope with their powers. I thought that was done extremely well. I also like the fight between Apocalypse and the X-Men. Not the destruction aspect of it, I'll get to it later, but I found the fight to be extremely well done and very fun and very dynamic. Within that scene, there's a very Inception-y level fight between Apocalypse and Charles Xavier. I won't spoil that for you, but it's done so well. That's just like mind blown and all that good stuff. What was okay about this movie? Jennifer Lawrence's character of Mystique. As I said before, her acting is fine. But the problem with her character is that she pretty much is a good guy in this movie. There's no anti-hero aspect of her, or villainy aspect that we see in the original X-Men and, First Class and some aspects of Days of Future Past. And while this works for this film, what happens is now that you can't do anything with her character anymore. There's nowhere to go. And another character that's similar to her in this movie also basically goes through the same thing. So what happens is that there is not much character development you can go from this point on. This movie, for a lot of the characters, pretty much hits the end of their arc. So you can't do much with it unless you fight an exterior threat. But that's not as interesting as the internal conflict, and they ran out of, things to fight over through that internal conflict. Another thing I was okay with was the Quicksilver scene. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a really well done scene. But for me, I just did not get the wow factor I got from the Days of Future Past scene. And this really did feel like a very fan servicey gimmicky, where it just wanted to capitalize on everyone's love for the scene in the first movie. And also, it was tonally in a very weird part of the movie. It did not match the scene that came before it. But it's a fine scene, so I'm not going to give it too much flack for it. There's a cameo scene of a certain famous character. I'm not going to give it away if you haven't seen the trailers. If you've seen the trailers, then you know what I'm talking about. This certain character's scene would have been actually pretty good if they didn't ruin it in the trailers. What was terrible about this movie was the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse were wasted. So if you don't know, Apocalypse has 4 horsemen who accompany him. They're basically his top 4 henchmen, basically. So Magneto is one of them. And again, his motivation is completely fine. But then you have other characters that are just completely wasted. Psylocke barely speaks. And she just fights for Apocalypse just because. Same thing with Archangel. He has a very one-dimensional reason for joining Apocalypse. Although it's well explained, it just doesn't, it doesn't do much for the movie. Nor does Storm. From what I can tell, she was mind-wiped, I guess. Going back to the ending, the end destruction of the world, it's very, very formulaic. We've seen this before. Like, oh no, bridges are flying up in the air. Oh no, the Sydney Opera House is getting destroyed. We've seen that before. And which is what I was afraid of. Thankfully, it's not that big of a part of the ending. But what's worse about it is that there's no human reaction to it. So it's just like visual stuff. And like I didn't really like Man of Steel that much. But what I can give it props for is that when there was destruction, it went all the way with it. So you see people, like getting thrown up in the air and then go, that type of thing. If this is the apocalypse as this movie wants to go for, you really should go all the way with its apocalyptic setting, let's put it that way. There is also no consequences. So there are definitely certain characters that contributed to the end of the world, and they don't get held responsible for it. I'm not going to go into the details of why, because that would be spoiling it, but everyone's just like, yay, the world is saved, there's no consequences and stuff. So yeah, that was bad. And also the timeline. Let's talk about the timeline. This Days of Future Past was an attempt to reset the timeline. That being said, it still does not make sense. So you have, take for example, I'm getting to nerdy territory, Havoc, who is, in the comic books, Cyclops' brother. Now, Havoc was in X-Men First Class, which took place 20 years before. And we get a Havoc that is, say, 20 years old-ish. Give or take. Now, Cyclops in this movie is a teenager, let's say 16 years old. So what you're telling me is that Havoc has a younger brother that was born when he was 20-ish. That doesn't make sense. So I still think they kind of screwed up the timeline, and I know why they keep on doing the time jump so they can connect it to the original. I just personally, it's personally unsettling, let's just put it that way. So overall, I still like this movie. Basically, what works really well. Michael Fassbender, again, continues to shine as Magneto, and his character is done really well once again. The performances are great overall, the action is great, and I was invested in the characters, the new and the old. There are problems with this movie, including the four horsemen being underdeveloped mostly, more CGI destruction that we've seen a million times, a two-dimensional villain that doesn't do much than splurt one-liners, but it's still well done. I'll give this movie a 7 out of 10. You definitely should still go watch it. It's an enjoyable ride. A lot of the problems that came up for me were stuff that I thought about after the movie, which shows how much I was entertained. So I give it a lot of props. This movie is definitely below Days of Future Past, First Class, and maybe even X2. But it's definitely better than X-Men 3 and X-Men Origins. So, X-Men Apocalypse. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next review.